All right. I think we are just about ready for the next session. I am actually out of this one, but I am going to get it started and throw to it. But before we get that started, we have some great panelists who I will let them do their thing and introduce themselves. But Mr. Mike, will you do a really quick favor and just tell everyone why you're wearing a tie today? Uh-oh, we have no audio from you. Uh-oh.
How about now?
Now we do.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Joe. Yeah, why I'm wearing a tie today, and actually why I'm wearing a tie every day in the month of December, is I'm participating in something called Dresscember. And so my college-age daughter encouraged me to join her in this. And essentially I'm wearing a tie every day in December. She's wearing a dress every day in December. And we're doing this to raise awareness and to raise money against human trafficking and slavery. So you can go to dresscember.org and donate there, and they'll give then their money goes to organizations that are working around the world to combat human trafficking and slavery. So it's part of Dresscember.
That is awesome. I applaud you, and I see you post that every day, and so that is fantastic. So with that being said, I am stepping out of this one. I'm going to turn this over to our awesome panel of experts, and this is the AV over IP, in case people have maybe heard a rumor that that's happening. Future of networked AV and UCC. So I will turn this over to you, and I'm cutting my video.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Peterson. I am the Audiovisual Experience Manager at Iowa State University. I've been in this role about 18 months now, maybe a little less than that. And before that, I spent 19 years at an audiovisual systems integrator. And so, yeah, excited to get going. Let's let everyone else introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of kick this off.
All right, my name is BC Hatchett. I'm the Associate Director for AV Design and Support and Media Services here at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been working in the higher ed AV industry for about 13 years now, and prior to that was in the broadcasting industry.
Me next, this is Jim Wellings at Utah State University, a senior designer and programmer here. Prior to this, I was in technical theater.
And good morning, I'm John Hewlin with Crestron. I am the National Education Director and been with Crestron for about 8 years now, but been in the AV industry for about 21 years now, mostly on the manufacturing side, but working with the educational institutions now all over the United States and Canada to see what they need and to see some of these trends that we're talking about today. And I just want to say thanks again for having me.
All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about AV over IP and how that may impact higher ed and where we're going with that. So I think we've got a pretty good set of things to talk about today. But one of the things I want to tee this up about is, as we were talking about this early on as a part of the committee, one of the things that we discussed is that really AV over IP is not new anymore. If you're here thinking that, hey, I'm gonna learn about this new thing, then you're probably behind the times. This is certainly, I'm hoping that this conversation is less about introducing people to the concept of AV over IP and more talking about, now that it's a thing and has been a thing for a while, what's the best practices and where do we want to go with this? We think about companies like Haivision or SVSI, which is now AMX/Harman/Samsung. They've been around for probably 10 years on the video side. And if we think audio, CobraNet, whether you call that IP or not, it was definitely running over a network switch. That's 20 plus years old now. So certainly AV has been running over IP for a very long time. And so this isn't new, but it certainly is continuing to grow and expand. And we want to talk about how to really take full advantage of that. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to BC, and I guess, where we want to start here. I guess the first question is, what is the current state of AV over IP?
Well, thanks, Mike. That was excellent background. As we started to continue to look at AV over IP, I think it's one of those buzzwords that's really starting to get wide acceptance in the AV industry as a whole. But like what you were talking about, it's important to remember that this is not new stuff, that this is something that's been going on for years and years in the AV industry. It's just now it seems like maybe networks are more robust enough to accept it, or maybe the fact that the price point has lowered to the point where it's easier to be adopted on a college campus. So kind of where I'm sitting, and I'd love to get Jim's thoughts on this here in a minute, is that the ability to push an AV signal and do the signal transport over the central switch in a building allows for a lot of unlimited applications, right? We're no longer tied to a black box in a room and then running HDMI cables out of it, or Cresnet cables, or whatever. We really had the capability to push, think of AV solutions as a building-wide or campus-wide opportunity without having to rely on these large matrix switches. I would be interested to hear John talk about, has this really hurt the traditional matrix switch down the road? Is this something that you guys on the manufacturing side, are you all starting to see an impact in kind of the way you guys design these products? So kind of circle back around to your original question, Mike. I think AV over IP is really kind of at the forefront right now. You're seeing manufacturers like Audinate move into the video realm. They're already a major player in the audio realm with Dante Audio. So it's something new. It's actually something that has a ton of applicability on everybody's possible campus. So Jim, I'd like to hear your thoughts also.
Yeah, well, definitely not new. I mean, we were doing essentially what was AV over IP. We had a satellite distance education network, which was MPEG-2 compressed video over satellite. That then went to terrestrial. We had some interesting stuff that was being used in the state. MPEG-1, VBRICS, to get video from point to point. Of course, the difference we see now is that was essentially low resolution stuff. It's all composite video. Now we're replacing high resolution video paths with AV over IP. And that to me is one of the huge things with it now, is the ability to send high resolution content, low latency content, to where you now have a signal across the network that visually looks indistinguishable from a dedicated cable. So it looks like an HDMI cable. Circling back to your comment, BC, about the costs, and be interesting to hear what John says about this. Our recent project using AV over IP, we actually designed the system for a new building, a new life science building here at Utah State. AV over IP saved us about 20 to 30% on the total cost of it. And I'm not sure that restaurant likes to hear that, because it's not as much sales to them, but hey, if we can save the money, we can build more rooms.
We're just here to help you guys, so we don't we don't have to worry about any of that. No, but in all seriousness, that's it's an important question, and it's one we're looking into. I believe that we have still yet to see the big part of the growth curve come with the AV over IP. So to I guess address BC's first part is that we haven't seen a significant dip in standard AV matrix switchers in the HD based T type, the digital media type, over the last couple years. But I have started to see a couple of things real quick. One is we've started to see more hybrid systems. And I think that's where we're going to go for a while. So, Jim mentioned a whole new building with NVX or with an AV over IP solution, and that's brilliant. But I also imagine that, number one, we have so many schools with lifecycle refresh plans that have existing HD-based T technology, even HDMI, extension technology that's not going away anytime soon. Where this AV over IP discussion is going to be super helpful and valuable is the idea that we take this existing system and add 1 or 2 boxes at each end. And now we have the ability to have it broadcast building wide or campus wide, as you mentioned. So I think right now we're in the early stages. I would say that while we already have a fully developed solution, the adoption rate is still going to take quite some time. There's so many battles that we have to address. I say battles, that's a pretty harsh term, but we've got people on this call that have a terrific relationship with our IT department, operate together as a team, and then others that have fight to even get one thing on the network. So that's an important aspect. So I do over time though see that the compression algorithms that are used to lower the bandwidth, then the new switch fabric that can do a gigabit Ethernet switch, the infrastructure with Cat5e cables that can already handle gigabit speeds, those all open the landscape to be able to adopt the AV over IP solutions. Did that kind of address a little bit about where the state is right now?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry to talk over you, Jim.
No, it was me actually.
Sorry, Matt.
I appreciate that. And I totally agree, by the way, on the hybrid solution. We're in the middle of building a new building here on campus, our Student Innovation Center. And we are certainly looking at more of a hybrid solution for that right now. We're working with our integrator partner, Mechdyne, on that. And some of the spaces are certainly going to have a traditional HD-based T switch center at the middle of it, but in every case, we're going to have an AV over IP, input and output, right? An encoder and a decoder in every solution, so that we can continue to distribute that around the building. Some rooms will be fully AV over IP. We just kind of looked at it on a use case basis and decided what made sense, where our risk aversion was also. As we're this is going to be our first real foray into it in a building wide sense. So
very cool. I know we've wrapped up a couple of projects recently that the entire infrastructure was based over AV over IP, and kind of what our largest installation to date is coming up next year in our School of Education. And in a design way, it made a lot of sense, being that a lot of the spaces in this building are going to be those active learning style spaces, those flexible spaces, those no defined center point of room. So the flexibility that AV over IP solutions provide, especially in those specialized active learning spaces, made a lot of sense to us. Being able to do a larger matrix route than what you would normally find in your traditional matrix switches. So it kind of goes back to that design aspect that I like to talk about with AV over IP, is that your network switch is your matrix switch. You don't have to buy a large card appliance and then leave several bays open. We're really able to customize those solutions out the door with exactly how many inputs and outputs we need, but also there's a massive level for scalability down the road if we need to.
Our life science building, we have a active learning space, and that was one of the places where we felt like we saved some money and made the room more flexible, being able to do it with the AV over IP solution without putting in a huge chassis. So we have 13 student pods and an instructor station, and really simplified the wiring and the operation of this room.
So we're actually moving into what I was hoping to have our next topic be, is what type of use cases could best benefit from AV over IP today. So we've already kind of talked about a few. I think I totally concur with the active learning space. That just seems like a natural fit because it was traditionally based around or needed to be based around some large full matrix switching solution. It seems like moving that to an AV over IP solution is a natural fit. But I was just curious, what other use cases do you guys see as real natural and best use cases for people to maybe want to think about moving into AV over IP?
I can chime in real quick and then have other people, comment too. What we've seen is a few others. On the keynote call, there was talk about e-gaming and esports arenas. So of course, those lend themselves to extremely low latency, but equipment back in a rack, and the gamers and the athletes, need to not have an experience with the AV signals of being delayed whatsoever. So we see a lot in the e-gaming spaces. I'm going to say nursing and medical simulation labs has come up quite a bit too, because we've seen medical schools and colleges of nursing need to have an instructor in a room, and then the students are in this observation room maybe, or this patient room, and so then they speak back and forth on what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. So we're seeing those. Mike, you're correct. I'd agree 100% on the active learning space. We've seen some other ones like multi-purpose rooms where you have divisible spaces that to get all the configurations you might want, depending on the type of meeting or event you're having, that requires one of those big matrix switchers again, maybe 32 points to plug in, but really you only have 3 or 4 large displays for the room being broken up. Instead of looking at maybe a 32 by 32 matrix, now we start talking about, well, we could do this with 36 endpoints and a switcher, a network-based switcher that was 48 ports. Everything can get to everywhere. So those would be a few that I'd see, or we've seen and talked to some schools about.
Looking at the chat, I also see Anthony Chirico. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name too awful bad, but digital signage, emergency messaging, overflow, one-off events. I know that talking about overflow, on our campus, we get a lot of high-profile speakers come on campus, and it's usually in spaces that can't accommodate a ton of in-person viewers. So being able to have 2 or 3, 4 satellite remote viewing spaces and being able to spin those up easily and securely makes a huge impact. And I think that security is one of those main concepts. And I know that Mike, you did add that to our list of discussion topics. Security is kind of the keystone now. Everything has to have security in mind when you're designing a system. I know on our campus, we get about 1 million hits almost every single day looking for attack vectors. So being able to lock these systems down where they don't become problem points is a huge consideration to take into account.
I'd second the comment on overflow for sure. So one of the things that we're able to do with the AV over IP system is, so for the first couple weeks of the semester, typically, and I'm sure a lot of people have this happen, you'll get over registration for some popular sections of classes. Typically, some of those people will drop after the first week or two. So we can place the class in a room that's not quite big enough for all the initial registrants, but we can offer the overflow to another room using the AV over IP. And after a couple of weeks, when the registration calms down, those people can then move into the main section, the main classroom. So that's been helpful. We tried that for the first time this fall. And then also one other thing we've done, in addition to active learning space, we have a hybrid room, which has some breakout pods, and it's also divisible. And that room was also easier to build with the use of the AV over IP.
No, that's great. This is all great conversation. Yeah, Joe, I was just putting in the chat, and we'll just mention here too. We're getting tons of comments. We appreciate that. We would encourage you, if you're comfortable, if you just pull down under 2 in the chat box where it says all panelists and change that to all panelists and attendees, then your comments could also be seen by the other attendees. Now, if you really want your comments just to come to us, the panelists, you can certainly leave it in that way. Just wanted to encourage folks to make that all panelists and attendees as you're putting your chats in here. So, yeah, so this is great. So we've talked about where we're at. We've kind of talked about some of the use cases, and there's so many more I'm sure we could talk about for use cases. But the next time we'll talk about is what are some best practices. This is kind of the heart of the matter here. What are some gotchas we want to avoid? What are some things that you could do just to really make this be successful? So what are some of the best practices that you guys are discovering or running into as you're working with AV over IP?
So I think at least on our campus, the best practice that we started with was looping in our network team first off. If they're not aware of what we're doing and making sure that the equipment that we're attaching to the network is compliant, that it's going to get killed very quickly. And I think in one training session, I heard the statement, if you plug in a transmitter on a 1 gig port and unconfigured, it's going to be an attention getter because you're sending a 1 gig multicast stream out over the entire network. So having that key partnership so that they can get the switches configured and get the VLAN set up and make sure that all of the potential pitfalls and problems that can arise with making sure that the network is configured correctly, those have to be addressed first. And then after that, it's just kind of making sure that the system that you design fits the needs of the space.
I would second the good working relationship with IT. I mean, that's key. We actually brought in a couple of endpoints and some equipment for our IT staff to experiment with. This was about 3 months before we actually got close to installing in the new building. So they had it sitting in their office, and they could put it through its paces. They could break their own network switch with it, and they found lots of ways to break the network with it. And they had that opportunity to experiment with it and see what the settings needed to be in the switches before we had to go and install it in the building. And we actually had, it was this time last year, we installed this entire building over Christmas break. So we had to be ready and had to know what was going to happen and plug this stuff in.
So I think also another thing to highlight real quick is making sure that you also have a good communication bridge between the manufacturer's engineering department and that network team that you work with, because there are going to be a lot of ins and outs that we might not have the answers for, and we need to connect those two elements directly. John, looks like you were getting ready to chime in with something as well.
I was, yeah, no, but I appreciate your comment there, and in leading off with the idea that a team approach absolutely is required. I saw everybody nods, and so get your IT team on board, whether it's using a few pieces of demo gear and having them test it with their switches. Some manufacturers are going to offer some maybe switch guides that talk about specific IT switch manufacturers setups and what they want to see. So that would help you. Certainly look for that type of material. Be sensitive to the IT team's need for security, and talk to them and try to have open conversation about what security protocols need to be met. That will help you in your selection process. Some solutions don't have proper security, and other ones do. So I'm just, general statement about security and how that manages it. Even to the point of it being an attention getter to throw one on your network. Some solutions have like IGMP snooping, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but will essentially just figure out where the other endpoints are, and that way their traffic will only go to those locations. So having a team-based approach with your IT group, getting some equipment in their hands if you can. I've seen a number of schools do that, as well as understanding the needs of the end users. There's so often when they when they give you more of a wish list than what's really required. And I think narrowing to that, some of that will help be sure that the design offers what is needed, but also doesn't get, blown out of proportion. Well, one day we might want to send one thing from here to there, try to forget that and focus on what the immediate need is, would be one of my points as well.
So John, you've probably seen a lot wider adoption. You've seen a lot more installations than probably we've seen here and there, because you get to travel around to different campuses. What are some pitfalls that we need to look at to avoid as we start to roll out AV over IP solutions on our campuses?
Sorry, I would say first off, using anyone else's solution. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I could.
There it is. There we were waiting for the
oh, sorry. No, that is a great question, and I'm going to need a little more time to think about it. But I just mean, look, first off, I can't underscore that first point about being coordinated with your IT team. The pitfalls are that the team rejects it. The IT managers, that they say, no, this is not working. Let's just say at some schools, they even look for reasons to, should I use a word as strong as sabotage, but not let it work on their networks correctly? Look, this can be a touchy subject when we're putting anything. And, first we started 5-10 years ago about an AVV LAN and so on. Now, when you start getting to the idea that this uses a whole, maybe network in and of itself, whether they run parallel or part of their own or so on, it gets even more touchy. So be sure that you have that buy-in, or that you have someone above who's got the vision of wanting to implement this in buildings or across campus that can be your voice for you. So I would say that's one of the biggest pitfalls. Another pitfall might just be not considering aspects of your design where the switcher might grow as far as scalability, and you use a small switch for an immediate need, and then you realize that you've got to go back and add more ports. Or the other thing to remember is signals going both directions. So, be cognizant of, if you go, well, we'd like to get 10 signals from here over to that building, or commencement overflow, or something like that. Be cognizant of the fact of whether or not you need to bring signals back. That can make the uplinks between your switches become very, very large. Certainly not as large if you're using a 1 gig solution versus like a 10 gig solution, but that could be a pitfall as well, is accounting for all the signals going back and forth.
Yeah, that bandwidth math is really important. And that was a gotcha we had with our installation. So we knew the kind of bandwidth we needed within rooms, but calculating the bandwidth between rooms, potential overflows, how many streams do we want to go from the backplane of one switch to another. And we actually discovered an issue with the switches we use on campus, and that the copper uplinks have a limit. So even if those copper uplinks are not connected to the stream, they can be overloaded by the number of streams on the switch. Even if you're only sending one stream out of it, we discovered that we had to use fiber between switches regardless of how many streams we were sending across. So it's really important to add up that total bandwidth and where you think that's going to go. And then also bear in, we were talking of an upgrade to another building here on campus, completely redoing the building with AV over IP. And it made a difference with the type of equipment that IT will install the next time they upgrade. So we're looking at installing switches during that upgrade to handle this kind of bandwidth. And we do run a converged network here. So we work with IT to make sure that our video can pass on the same switches, and we make sure that that bandwidth is there. And I'd actually be curious to see the people who have done this, how many are building a parallel network and how many are trying to use a converged network.
I know, Jim, we're trying to do a merged network. When we first went down the road on this with a construction project a few years ago, we looked at a parallel network, but then we realized that that was kind of counterintuitive to what AV over IP was supposed to do, where if we looked at building a converged network, we could assign the VLAN at the port level. So that way, if we needed to scale up and add a new either encoder or transmitter, we just talk to our network friends and they change the configuration at that specific port, and you're ready to go. There's no need to run a new cable. There's no need to log into a different system to configure it. It just kind of made sense to make it all one ecosystem.
That's the direction we're headed in our new building right now too, is we're just gonna have, one network infrastructure. We'll create the network separation in a virtual sense, VLANs or MPLS or whatever the solution our network team decides to go with. But yeah, so that's the direction we're headed as well. I suspect that's the direction things will be moving more in the future. I do know that when I worked at the integration company, our early forays into this was very much the opposite. It was, hey, we're trying to do this on our own independent network switch that doesn't touch anything else, just to minimize any sort of network trouble. But I think that we're getting enough finesse in the industry right now from the various manufacturers on their AV over IP devices that we can get to the point now where we can get them all on a converged network. So the next thing, we've talked about it briefly, but I kind of want to double down on this a little bit, is network security for AV over IP. Jim, I am curious, your building was a life sciences building. Did you find any particular additional requirements from from a health patient information perspective on putting that on a network? So.
Well, not really, because we already have so much stuff on the network anyway, and we're already paying attention to security, and this is we found it's part of working with IT. It's usually their number one concern is security, and they have sensitive information passing across their switches almost no matter where they are. We do something here, I'm sure a lot of people do, is that we actually, when we do an AV installation in a classroom, we add a switch, and that switch is connected via uplink to the building network. It's part of the main campus infrastructure, and it's managed by IT. So we have that client switch in the classroom, and there's actually even physical security considerations with that. It needs to be in a locked cabinet so somebody can't come and plug a connector into the wrong port on it and potentially have access to sensitive information. So I feel like there wasn't really any additional things we needed to worry about here. The only thing possibly is just more devices and more parts that we're using.
John, what are some of the things, I mean, you can only speak for yourself, but what are some of the things that Crestron was thinking through from a network security perspective as you guys have designed and continue to update some of your AV over IP devices? So.
Sure. And, by the way, Mike, I appreciate the question, especially to Jim, because HIPAA compliance, FERPA certainly, but HIPAA compliance too affects a lot of different campuses. I mentioned the nursing simulation lab or the medical simulation lab, and, there's schools that get into some of those issues as well. But we tried, because of that, we tried to take more of an overarching view on where is this device going to go? Is it going to go to be put in just at a college and university? Is it a corporate, an enterprise solution, government solution? So we tried to take all aspects of the ecosystem and design the solution that we offer based on those security requirements. So for instance, we took everything basic like the AV industry might do, AES for audio encryption and so on, but also added things like TLS, transport layer security, and 802.1x, but even things like Active Directory and adding the idea of authenticating boxes and users into the system. And And then we even took a step farther because this solution, AV over IP from probably anybody, but we looked at it really strictly from our government users and our military users. So we went places that other people might not go, which would be like JITC certification, and again that's in FIPS 140-2 certification, but that's essentially the most secure. So so ideally everything that could handle from the White House to a small classroom and make sure that the information going back and forth transmitted is encrypted and secure. But those would be some of the general, I guess, security issues I'd look at: TLS 802.1x and higher level security issues or certifications.
And the inclusion of Active Directory was really helpful. And then some of the things that were done to make the equipment perform better on the network and be more of an IT device and an AV device. I know with our IT staff, you'll either get complaints from them about devices and the way they perform on the network, or they won't say anything. And in this case, we gave them the stuff and they made it work and they didn't say anything, which is a stamp of approval as far as we're concerned.
John, you did get a question to provide those lists of encryptions again.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. I should know every single one off the top of my head, but give me 1 second. I'm pulling up it off the spec sheet. So, you know, written by the engineers, and they've got every single one. But real quick to label them off. Aside from the JITC and the FIPS 140-2, the AES encryption, 802.1x authentication, Active Directory. There's even, and I mentioned TLS, but PKI authentication, private key, and then SSH network protocol, HTTPS, secure CIP, and SFTP. So there's a ton that it could be under. I guess the big thing is find out from your specific department, your IT department, what levels of security they require from anything they're going to throw on the network. But any other manufacturer should probably list out theirs as well for you.
So I want to take a break here, and we had a panelists join us here about midway through. So Dean, welcome. I don't know if you wanted to do a little introduction of yourself and maybe give some of your initial thoughts. We kind of been talking about the state of AV over IP, some of the best use cases, some of the best practices. So yeah, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to chime in here with. So.
Hey, good morning. Sorry, I missed everybody a little bit earlier. I had some things going on here at work that were on the team needed to be at instead of being here. So I let Joe know that a couple days ago. So I don't have a lot right now, and I missed a whole bunch of what was going on, so I don't want to repeat anything. What I am hearing has been one of the main drawbacks of AV over IP is the new chipset and how some of the current technologies aren't going to be able to take advantage of those to the most maximum.
Can you just give a brief introduction of yourself, Dean?
Sorry, my name is Dean Wentworth, and I am with the United States Department of Courts out of Charlotte, North Carolina.
So do you have any more, I guess I'd follow up real quick, Mike, if that's okay, but
yeah.
Dean, do you have any more, I guess, specifics on what you feel like, I guess which specifications the current solutions might not meet? You mentioned that, but I wasn't quite sure if you had something specific in mind.
Sure, we've actually, I'm working on a design right now, and some of the, and again, I'm talking about AV over IP in general, not necessarily your particular product, that some of the new chipsets put out for 4K, that some of the current solutions aren't going to be able to meet that to its needs. This is just something that I've heard of over the weekend, and I'm actually trying to research it. It's actually one of the reasons I wasn't able to be on the call when we started this morning.
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, you know, you're going to look through the spec sheets, and a lot of people are going to say we cover this resolution or that resolution. You know, I'm a proof is in the pudding guy, so I'd say first off, you know, check any solution you're looking at if you can, especially if it's a large scale deployment. A little bit of money on the front end will go a long way to making sure you're happy with the solution that you choose. But as far as handling the resolutions, you know, that's why we picked a point of 1 gig support, because we thought we know we can handle all the way up to 4K 60 frames 444 resolutions, but of course everything below that, it's when you start trying to look below that threshold or way above it if you're planning for 8K to really pay attention to what's being supported and the resolutions there. As far as chipsets, I'm not sure. I would want one of my engineers to comment on that, but maybe Mike or Jim or BC know a little bit more on that end.
No, but when you said 8K, I just kind of wanted to start crying.
I personally don't have 8K eyes, so I'm going to be in trouble.
So Jim, I was curious. We're going to transition a little bit here. So you've certainly you've had a building up for almost a year. How's that been working for you? What's the reception been? Has anyone noticed any difference? Have you got any comments? I was just curious how the reception was over this last year.
Well, from the user standpoint, I don't think they really notice unless something goes wrong. And we've actually had very few problems in that building, which is great. I mean, we love it when there are no issues. And it seems like it's been more reliable. It's actually the design of the building and the way it's put together from a programming standpoint is a ton more complex, which it probably didn't need to be. So this is all lessons learned. For example, and anybody who's a Crestron programmer will understand this when I say it, but we have a Crestron's management device, their XIO director, controlling all these endpoints throughout the building. So it has a dedicated control processor that talks to it. So every other processor in the building actually has an Ethernet communication symbol that talks to that processor. This is actually something maybe a suggestion for Crestron, ways they can improve the product is to allow more connections. But so this makes the building programming wise very complex, but it has been reliable. So I really can't complain there. Just lots of system intercommunication to make this work. And it's actually changed the way that we troubleshoot and the way that we support the building. So if there is an issue with a room going down or an endpoint dropping off, the usual situation, often someone would default to running in and restarting a processor. Just reboot the thing. Well, no, don't do that anymore because you may take down half the building.
Right.
You look with the tools, the monitoring tools you have, and see which devices are communicating. And if it is a program, one slot in a processor, you can restart that. If it's a single device, you can check that device and reboot it if necessary. So it kind of changes the way we do that. I hope I didn't digress too much there, but that's kind of what we found. Pretty reliable. A lot of it's because it's new, of course, but it seems to be robust.
Have you found have you found some of the flexibility come into play? Have you ever needed to do an overflow or something and it's like, hey, that was easy. We just threw a couple extra decoders in and we were off to the races or something like that? I was just curious if you've noticed any of the benefits that way. So.
We did our active learning space, and I think it relates to this space like it does to about every other space. No matter how big you build it, it's not going to be big enough. So we had a couple of classes booked into our active learning space that we had overflow for. So we actually added a decoder in another room and sent the signal as an overflow to that room. The issues we had there, I mentioned the challenge of sending streams between switches and making sure you have the bandwidth available for that. We had to work with IT to make sure we could do that without causing issues in the rest of the building. Since we are on a converged network, we had to watch our bandwidth as we started to pass streams between classrooms.
Wait, can I follow up with that? Because I'm really curious. I'm so glad you brought that up. Once you ran it by them, did they say you're okay? And were you able to expand to as much overflow space as you needed? Or did they pull you back in?
Well, we didn't ask them for a whole lot. We're basically looking at a couple of streams. We are to the point, though, where if we want to expand beyond that, then we need to discuss, and we already are discussing with them, different configurations that would be needed on the network to handle those streams. Because we are, if we did this a lot, then we would be at a point where the building network could be overloaded.
And I was curious if I could throw something out, Mike, too. What, I guess, let's see here. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Well, have you all been asked? There's a lot of people who think that when they're very concerned about using a room system that is in the room. So if one room goes down, that's the only room that goes down, versus a central nervous system. Let's just call it, I'm using my own term, of one system or one switch managing many classrooms. So I'd love to hear from the panel, what they expect and what their concerns are. Does their school want them or are going to allow them to have that topology, or are there major concerns that way?
I'll jump in real quick, because we have a way that we started to approach this about a year before we did this life science building, in that we actually worked with IT to locate a lot of our equipment in their data closets. So we actually have an AV rack in data closets in the building we built just prior to the life science building. And we actually find that it can be an advantage. So for one thing, they have UPS on all their power. The room is cooled. If there's an issue in a classroom, we can and we have to look at the equipment, and we can get into the data closet and not interrupt the class. I mean, there are all kinds of advantages for us. And as long as we have a good working relationship with IT, where they trust us to go in and out of their data closets when necessary, and that we're not doing something in there we shouldn't be doing, as long as we have that good relationship, I think it helps.
Yeah, I think to jump in, I think Jim brings up some excellent points where it's kind of changed our service model a little bit. We don't, you don't have those individual room systems, and you got to think about service in a little bit of a different way, especially like you said, John. If you have something that goes down that takes down several spaces, how do you plan for that? Locally, the way that we've kind of planned for it is the way we did for our normal classrooms, where we keep some hot spares on the shelf. So if we have a controller go down, we've got one there. We just drop the code in, change some configurations on the network side as far as MAC addresses go, and make sure the VLANs are set correctly, and then we just pop it back in, and we're up and running. It's actually a lot faster. It would actually be a lot faster than if we had just like a podium switch or a podium matrix go down. Conversely, if a building switch goes down, odds are our system is going to have some interruption in it anyway. So it's kind of, you're folding that risk into a pre-existing risk channel, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really good point, BC, because most of the control is going to run across those building switches anyway, in our case, at least to some extent, to some point. And, if the building switch goes down, you're not going to have communication between your touch panel and your central controller in any scenario. The other advantage in some respects, it's an advantage in that, enterprise network solutions really are designed to be much more fault tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, they have redundant power supplies, redundant fan systems. As Jim mentioned, if you're setting these in IT closets, they're probably going to have UPSs, potentially even generator backup as needed.
Mm-hmm.
So in many cases, we're actually raising potentially the uptime by putting these on enterprise grade network solution.
So we've had some, been looking at the webinar chat, we've had some questions coming in we like to talk about here. It's kind of like, so who decides what switches are bought? What's that conversation look like? Is that something that the AV group would then tell the network team, hey, we need this specific switch? Or do we just kind of go with what they decide? I know locally, we're going to go with what they decide. They are the network engineers. I am not a network engineer. I'm happy when I plug something in and it works. So I'm happy to keep those conversations and those decisions at their level. But I'll be interested to kind of see what you guys think. Jim, you're still muted there, sir.
My little spacebar shortcut wasn't working. Yeah, in our situation, it's definitely the network team that makes the call on the switches. So that's why one of the reasons we gave them our hardware ahead of time so they could test it, was to make sure it was going to work with their switches, and so they knew what kind of configuration they would have to make.
John, question for you.
Sorry, I wanted to comment on that, but I thought Mike was going to pop in for a second. You know, I'm thrilled to hear that at least I think most of the panel members, hopefully every single one, will agree that the IT team is going to probably make that call. There may be some instances where you get to have your own little network, so you get to make the call. I just want you to know, look at the parameters. Everybody on the call should look at the parameters of an AV over IP solution that they're going to choose. And chances are they'll fall into the categories of, you can make the big, quick categorizations. Do I need a 10 gig switch, or do I need a 1 gig switch, or does it not even have to be that robust? But the other thing would be, what's the uplink need to be? Because I do envision X number of signals going from one location over to the other. So it's a gigabit switch, but maybe a 10 or a 40 gig uplink. And then no matter who chooses it, again, any manufacturer worth their salt should have a list, I would think, of participating manufacturers, that network switches that they've tested, that they can say, if you use this model or these sets of models from this provider, you're going to have a solution that works. So we have lists of Extreme, Juniper, Cisco, and so on, but most other manufacturers should be able to provide something like that. If they don't, definitely test. And then, sorry, BC, you were going to say something too.
No, you answered my question there.
Oh, okay, good.
So we're good.
I did want to build on this a little bit, something that I think Joe Way threw in the chat. I don't know if that was just to us or to public, but he was asking if there's any hidden costs involved if we go to something like this. Yeah, it might lower our AV, capital cost up front. But again, and it's true in our case, the department that owns the network ports that are involved, there is a monthly charge paid that they have to pay to our central IT department for every network port that they have open. So, this is certainly something that, as we're looking at moving toward this in an additional way, that's something we have to add into our conversation when we meet with the client. Here's your upfront costs, but here's some potential recurring costs that might even just be internal to your own university in our case.
Yeah, we if it's a departmental space or something like that, there is a charge for each individual data drop. But the actual fees for servicing and maintaining the network are charged out at a different way. You're absolutely right. There are hidden costs in there. You are going to be buying more switches. Switches are extremely expensive, but you got to look at the life cycle on those switches as well. You're going to get a little bit more longevity out of a switch than you probably are out of your AV matrix switch, because it's just going to be sitting there, but it's going to be getting a clean power supply. It's going to have that redundant power system. It's going to be cooled and in a conditioned and clean environment. Plus, hopefully I don't get in any trouble for saying this, but it seems like it's easier sometimes for the network team to say, hey, I need to buy X amount of switches. There's, everybody knows what a switch is. It's an easily digestible piece of information that everybody knows what it is. So those purchases can be a little bit easier to push through, as opposed to, hey, I need to buy X amount of these devices to do this. And somebody will inevitably raise their hand and say, well, my cousin works at Best Buy, I can get that for $10. Sometimes it's just, from a budgetary standpoint, it can be a little bit easier since a network is a digestible need on campus.
Yeah, and you brought to echo your comments, BC, that I have seen. There's a specific university I've worked with where they had to rent their network drops for every classroom, right? So that was what I would call a hidden recurring cost. And so that would be one. The switches can get expensive. I guess, what I'd want, every participant on the call to look at is, are we able to share the costs over several rooms? So in other words, is one switch, a 48 port switch managing 10 or 12 rooms or rooms worth of gear? So that can help. When you look at just a side-by-side comparison. But I would say if you don't have an existing infrastructure that will handle what you need to send AV over IP signals, then that could be a hidden cost. Or again, your uplink between switches, I would think could be a secret hidden cost. It's one of those where it's like, oh, I thought I could send 40 signals from this building over here. Well, no, right now we'd have to run fiber, I guess, as Jim mentioned earlier. Now maybe we've got a little cost to pull some fiber and get it terminated or whatever. So those would be a couple of the hidden costs I could see coming up.
But like any other project, those are kind of your upfront costs, right? Like once you run that fiber, once you run that copper, it's there, unless somebody cuts it accidentally. But I mean, it's going to be there. So you're in a way, I hate this word, but in a way, you're kind of future-proofing your solution down the road because the infrastructure is built out.
Another question that came up that I really like, give a shout out to one of my colleagues here, Dan Brower at Iowa State. He was asking, for those with AV over IP, what is the makeup of your service programming team to troubleshoot the issues? Are multiple techs cross-trained in network troubleshooting, or are there only one or two on-site techs with the knowledge to quick fix the rooms? So I was curious, BC, you kind of mentioned that. I was curious if you wanted us to expand on that. And then Jim, I was curious, what your experience has been that way?
So in our experience, once we decided that we were going to go down the road of using AV over IP solutions, we did target a couple of staff members that have some networking background and networking experience, and we're also working on our AV team. And we sent them to training. We wanted them to know the ins and outs of the pieces of equipment. We wanted them to know how they function. What are some common issues and how can they service them fairly fast if something does come up? So we did have that dedicated few staff members that once they went to training, they came back on campus and also kind of showed everybody the ropes. We also worked with our manufacturers to bring some certification classes on campus as well, so that way all of our staff members could eventually be certified in knowing what that solution is, knowing we are going to be seeing more and more of these the AV over IP devices coming online in the future.
Yeah, and in our situation, we have a couple of full-time support staff, and they divide the day, basically the working day for the rooms in half, and they each manage a student crew. So I would say the students have not had a lot of training with the devices, but they know what are issues they can fix and which are issues they cannot fix, and they know when to escalate the call. Our full-time staff know how to get in and use some of the system tools that are available, like I mentioned, to see what's online and what's not, which devices are or are not communicating. And they can usually solve that issue then. And that's done from your desktop, which is I'd say another advantage to this. I can sit here at my computer and see exactly what's wrong and pinpoint the problem. So I would not consider myself tier 2 because I'm working on other stuff, but it can be escalated to me as well if it needs to be, or the other folks that are intimately familiar with the hardware. So I'd say it's a little different way of approaching it, but on the other side of that, I feel like this hardware has been really reliable. We've actually had fewer calls that were not fewer calls that needed to be escalated.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It seems like the buildings that we have brought online using AV over IP solutions, once we turn the key, it seems like it has been a lot more stable and reliable than some of the traditional solutions that we've used.
So let me flip that question. I'm just curious. Have you found any of your networking professionals on your campuses taking an interest in your AV over IP devices and choosing to get some extra education themselves on your AV over IP devices so that they can be more knowledgeable from their side about taking care of your needs? I was just curious.
We haven't. Now, our network team that we've worked with on our AV over IP solutions, they've gotten very invested in it. Like, they know what the network needs to look like and how they need to configure things on both the device side and the network side. But I mean, at the same time, they chose that network path. That's kind of what they want to do. Knowing what the AV piece is definitely opened their eyes to the importance of what it is that we do, but it hasn't necessarily translated into somebody from the networking team wanting to come over and work on the AV team, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they're invested enough to understand what the needs are and what they need to do to make it work, and I think they're pretty good about that. The other thing we did for our network team was we installed a video wall for monitoring in their facility, and that they really like that, and that it makes them automatically more interested in the AV portion of what we're doing with their network. And also, they have a conference room as well that's equipped, so they're getting into it a little bit, I'd say.
Kind of curious, real quick, if the attendees would, I'm just, use your raise hand feature. I'm kind of curious how many of you guys already have an AV over IP solution on your campuses or in your environments. Okay, it's got a few coming in here. Very cool.
BC, while you're counting those up, can I address one other question I saw floating through the chat?
Yeah, of course.
Too. It's Steve. Sorry, I moved off of it. Ask if AV over IP was quote unquote fast enough to handle overflow, and so you can tally up some of the responses of how many people are using it, but the answer would definitely be yes, meaning that there's streaming solutions in the past, and we've had to worry about buffering and in the latency and so on. You got to make sure you couldn't see or hear the other space so that you wouldn't have those issues. But for the in-room experience is what he asked about. We've seen where it handles a mouse going across the screen, nice and smooth. Again, to e-gaming spaces and labs where you need immediate response. So I would say with the latency of less than a frame per second, absolutely the technology is there. And and then I've got one more too off the chat tab, but BC, how many other raised hands came in?
It looks like we got around 10 folks raise their hand, so that's a pretty good amount right now.
Yeah, that's 15 or 20% of the people maybe starting to see some of those solutions. The other thing I thought was interesting, and I'd be really curious to hear the feedback from you is a couple of people chimed in. I'm still waiting for everything to get up to 1080p. So Jim, how about you start and have you been pushing 4K over your AV over IP solutions, or has it been lower resolution? And Mike, your plans, I know you got something coming up. So what about that, Jim?
I would say that 90% of our use is 1080p. Really the issue we have is that we can't build a space or a display big enough to offer 4K to all the viewers in the room. And that's always going to be a physics issue. That's why I hear 8K, I kind of laugh a little bit, like, it's just not going to, everybody's going to have their face buried in a huge display to be able to see that. But we do use a lot of Microsoft Surface Studios for classroom computers, and we do allow them to push 4K content to displays where we can do that. And we haven't seen any issue. Or Active Learning Space has one of these 4K essentially instructor machines.
Yeah, it's curious. We're generally planning for 1080p throughout the building that we're putting together. I'm kind of a 4K naysayer, and even more so with 8K. I mean, you either need to have a really ginormous display, or you need to be really close to the display, in my opinion, for 4K, and even more for 8K to even have any relevant benefit to you. In most classroom scenarios, you're not going to get a display large enough that the back of the room is going to have any 4K benefit. So I'll be honest, I'm kind of a 4K downer from that perspective. So
Right. Well, so I guess more than anything else, it was to encourage people to know resolution may be kind of a side topic on this AV over IP discussion. If you can get some benefits of it, don't worry about the fact that it can push 4K. Just go, hey, once if we ever get there, maybe we'll think about it. But I'm there with you. It's going to take a while till it really matters that we have that resolution, and probably more often on big video walls where each part might be 4K to make an 8K type signal, right? But anyway, thanks for that feedback. I appreciate it. And Dean, jump in too if you guys have seen any or have a resolution requirement.
So we did get a question from Matthew Fernley about what percentage of AV over IP is in terms of market penetration. And then for John, how does this compare to overall market penetration? To be honest, I'm not real sure as far as how well how well AV over IP has kind of penetrated the market. I know we're seeing more solutions and more advertising for it, but as far as how that translates to sales and adoption rates, I can only speak for our campus, and that's in that we are planning to be purely AV over IP within the next few years.
Again, I can only speak from my campus perspective too. I think it's going to be much longer for us to get a pretty wide adoption throughout campus, and that has more to do with just our current funding rate, and how quickly we can do room refreshes. So I think we're probably on a much longer time scale here, but it has nothing to do with the technology or technology adoption. It's purely a financial aspect.
I'd say on our campus, we're probably to the point where more than half of what we install going forward is going to be AV over IP. Just because we're familiar with it now, we're used to it. It's actually fairly easy to build a smaller room, and this sounds strange, but we're building a lot of smaller rooms now, fewer inputs, fewer outputs. That could be pretty easily done with AV over IP and pretty cheaply.
So I did want to circle back on something we were talking about as far as working with your network team, and I wanted to bring in one of our colleagues, Donovan Monday from West Virginia. And Donovan, talk a little about your experience working with your network team. Sounds like you've had a very positive experience, and they've taken an interest in the AV devices themselves. Tell me a little bit more about that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great. So.
Our networking team has actually been fantastic with our transition from standard AV shop to what we call AV over AVIT, AV over IP shop. They have been ground floor buy-in people with us. So they've been able to, in fact, just this week, we were working on a project where we were implementing a wireless network now into our AV VLAN, where we'll be able to now control our rooms through iPads and do the things wirelessly on Toolbox and some of the other things that we couldn't do before that we can do now. As far as AV over IP goes with them, the implementation of our video walls and our streaming boxes, and we're a huge distance education shop. So we have campuses all throughout our state that we connect with daily for classes and for conferences and things. So we're not only an education and designing classrooms, we're also doing distance education and VTC shop as well. So everything that we have been doing is because our network team has had the buy-in from the beginning.
Very cool.
And you training, they even went to some of the Crestron training with you, or took some of the Crestron training?
They've taken some of the online Crestron training with us, as well as the Extron versions, just so they had a better understanding of what our language was. So when we're talking to them about what we needed, they could translate it into what they needed on their side. And I'm kind of an in-between person where I'm a network engineer, but I work with the AV team. So I'm kind of the in-between liaison between both sides. So I think that this is where our shops should be going. We should have a better understanding of what, network teams do, and they should have a much better understanding of what we do.
That's great. That's great. So we still have a couple minutes left here, I think, in this session before we take another break. But what I wanted to do is kind of go around with my panelists and just kind of ask, where do you see this? Where do you see this headed? Right. Let's get a little futuristic. Let's play the futurist role here a little bit, and maybe not just I guess maybe either on your campus or just broadly in the higher ed marketplace. Just curious. So where do y'all see this headed?
I guess on my campus, I see this kind of continuing where we started, I guess is a way to put it. It's just rolling out more of these AV over IP solutions to replace those traditional matrix switches. It just, from where I said it just seems more reliable. It seems like that's where the market is heading, and it opens up so much more scalability and opportunity for interoperability between rooms that I kind of feel like if I start going backwards and using those matrix switches again, I'm kind of doing a disservice to my institution. With space and dollars being the premium that they are, the ability to kind of outfit these rooms faster, cheaper, more reliably, it's too attractive for me to not be able to do. And particularly one kind of futurist thing that you kind of hinted at that we're looking at is, I think, for the ability for cross-campus teaching. So you might have a faculty member teaching a class in one room, and it can be easily shared to different spaces across campus. That way, or even in a dream scenario, they could teach it from maybe their office to multiple rooms. That way, we can kind of lower some of the cost that we incur in operating these spaces, because we can use them more effectively.
Yeah, I would agree with that. More use of overflow in our case. We've also seen a large decrease in the number of inputs we use in a classroom. So where we used to need a matrix switcher with 5 or 6 or 7 inputs on it, we kind of find that we no longer need that. We're down to 1 or 2 or maybe 3 inputs in a room. Often the AV over IP transmitters have 2 inputs. That's all you're going to need for a small room. So we're able to reduce our costs, reduce the equipment footprint. So we don't need a huge rack. The stuff that does need to go into a rack could go into the IT closet. It just seems to be a leaner, more cost-effective way of doing things, and more easily centrally managed as well, I think.
Oh, Mike, you're here.
Yep. So, John, how about you? Where do you see this headed from a manufacturer perspective? So
yeah, we've seen lots of different applications and ways it's rolling out on campus. I think and Jim just touched on it too a little bit. The topology and the room designs are going to be affected by AV over IP, right? So you're going to imagine all the things that you could potentially do, but to the professor, the faculty member, he walks in or she walks in at 9 a.m. and teaches her class in a small, room of 30 students, let's say, in a normal fashion, but then walks out. And at noon, you have, I'm just making something up here, but a teaching assistant walk in and the classroom feed comes from another place across campus, or across the globe, because multiple schools here represented have international campuses today. So I think that the topology and the room design is going to be affected. I think that we won't have to distinguish between flipped learning classrooms and lecture style, or where there's movable furniture that one professor walks in and quickly chooses to lecture with his content going everywhere, and then another professor walks in and they quickly break up into case study groups or things like that. And then look, if we look at the 30,000 foot level, I think campus planning and space usage. So I know for a number of you, it'll resonate that you have your group of departmental or general purpose classrooms, and they're totally filled up. But the other department has 5 classrooms over here, and this is my area. No one gets to touch it. And then they go, no, I'm sorry, for space utilization and campus planning, we need to do that. Now we add in the capabilities of AV over IP, solutions. I think you're able to open up many of those doors. And as we, Jim touched on it too, as we look at the number of sources being reduced in classrooms because things are going from paper to digital. These types of solutions help. So if you're not doing them today, and someone asked about market saturation, I think it is still early. The number of people raise their hands is probably indicative of what we've seen in the market, 10 to 15%. The same question next year when we do this, or 6 months from now, is going to go up, and then we're going to see the adoption go up significantly.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I wanted to thank all our panelists on this session. Stick around. There'll be another session starting here in about 10 minutes. At the very beginning, Joe asked me why I was wearing a tie. I gave a little brief description of December and why I'm doing that. I'm going to throw my fundraising link into the chat here for everyone. So if that's something that you might feel you want to donate to, just through the link up there, feel free. Again, that's December. I'm wearing a tie every day this month to raise awareness and some money to fight human trafficking, slavery. So
that is fantastic. Hey, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, BC. BC, you're done for the day. You made it 2 through. And thank you, John. And of course, I've still got Donovan there for his input. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. This was fantastic. I learned a lot because this is all new to me. I mean, I'm going to ask for prayers because we're doing 250 rooms over summer of AV over IP. So either it'll be a huge success, or I will be sending you my resume in mid-August. So it'll be one of those 2 things. So this is awesome. Thank you all. And yes, we're going to take a break in 10 minutes. We are coming back for one more. See if I can hit my share. One more for the day, which is our accessibility and universal design. Jim, you're staying on for this one. Everybody else, check this one out. I'm really excited. The panel coming into this one is wait till you see this. Wait till you see. So fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Take care.